Hello, welcome to Dangerous Policy. My name is Crispin.
I'm Charlene. It's good to be back.
She never left. She was always here. She was always niddling me, always under my skin. However, now she's also under your skin, which is great. But seriously, we're now doing our first of our weekly reviews, where we look back on the previous week's videos and questions are asked to have a bit of a discussion. So any comments that sort of arose in the comment section that kind of were relevant to this can be raised. And Charlene, in her own kind of reviewing as she edits and puts on the video and does all that excellent B-roll, can also reflect and see what sort of questions she would like to ask. And that just makes it, I guess, a bit more natural. So I have no preparation for this or any idea whatsoever as to how this discussion will go. Hopefully you find value in it, in kind of exploring some of the bits that maybe I didn't properly cover off, and we'll see. So,
yes, let's take it away. So I've obviously been behind the scenes and editing everything that Crispin says, and I feel like Crispin, you kind of go on a bit of a tangent, and it takes me some time to actually be like, what did he say? Is this English? Am I watching someone speaking English? But that said, like, I'm always keen to learn new things. So throughout the week, we discussed a few things. Vladimir Putin released that essay about Russia. And then you also have made the argument that we need Russia in order to beat China. Now, I think I watched the entire video and didn't understand what do we mean by beating China? Like economically, like with the US trying to be the next superpower, like I don't understand. And then also the role of Australia. Because again, I think in a previous episode we discussed that, it's actually good for Australia to kind of be on both sides. We had the US to support like military, and then China to support our trade and education system. Yeah, what does that mean to actually just beat China?
That is a really great question. It's a question that's not asked often enough, actually. So to beat China, when I used the term in that video, meant to not have China replace the United States as the major geopolitical power in the world, right? That is because geopolitics is determined largely by economic size and military strength. And people underestimate how influential that is for the global order. So, for example, the United States has been the most powerful country in the world since about 1870, 1860, something like that. Now, before that, it was the British Empire for several decades. And before that, it was China, right? Until back to the Roman Empire, basically. And the reason for that is that for most of world history, economic size and military capability was basically determined by one's population and one's territory, right? The more people and more territory you had, the more powerful you were. And the reason for that is because most people produced roughly the same amount across the world. Like everyone was kind of agrarian, they all kind of grew food and lived a fairly simple lifestyle. So, more people, more territory, more power, right?
Yeah.
Then we had the Industrial Revolution, which allowed a small country in the North Atlantic to break the nexus between one's individual productive capacity. So one person with the power of electricity and engines and technology could suddenly produce vast quantities of material goods, much more than they could in the past. And so that basically meant that you had this tiny little country, Great Britain, that sort of took over the world. Why so many people around the world speak English today is because of that one technological shift. And from the Chinese perspective, what we are seeing is a structural return to the long-standing norm, right? So from the Chinese worldview, they're not emerging, they're re-emerging, right? They're just going back to the way things were, that there was a bit of a blip for 150 years. But China has always been the most powerful country in the world in their mind, basically because they had a large number of people, although they would attribute some cultural things to that as well. So for the United States, however, which is a much younger country, no American today can really imagine what a world looks like when they're not the most powerful country in the world. And a lot of Australians in that boat too. It's a change, not just to who's got the most, the biggest buildings or whatever. It's a change to the way the whole world works. At the moment, the world, the global system is dominated by a sense of property rights, territory, of transnational rules of trade, and also the collective commons, the oceans, space, cyber, that these things have to be shared, these things have to be free. And concept of individual rights, individual liberty, freedom of speech, freedom of association, the sovereignty of personhood. All of this is Western Enlightenment ideas that have spread around the world, not just because they're good ideas, but because they're backed by enormous power. Like in that previous video, which we could talk about when we talk about the British Navy ending slavery. Well, Navy's military power, right? It wasn't, it was a British value militarily enforced, right? And it would be incredibly naive to think that Chinese values would not be militarily enforced if China was the most powerful country in the world and had the means to do so. And we see that most notably, I think, in the South China Sea, where China claims that it owns the entirety of the South China Sea because, apparently, according to them, some fishing ship had a shipwreck somewhere in one of the islands, and therefore it's, historical ties, right? So the concept of historical ties is not something that is recognized in the same way by the global order as it is today. They say, well, there's territory and it's based on range from shore, and we try and make it fair. Whereas China's like, no, that's all crap. Our historical claim takes precedence to whatever your international law suggests, right? So it's a different way of looking at the world. And China has a different value system to the rest of the world. They're not the same as the West. They do believe in a sense of deep-rooted hierarchy that's born of a Confucian tradition. So when I say beat China, it means resisting a Sinocentric world order, right? Preserving the Western liberal tradition in terms of being the dominant force governing international affairs. Now, there is a corollary to that. I think that some people in America, there's a question that people need to ask themselves about this, because it is a very good question you've asked, is would the rest of the world be happy with a democratic China? Let's say, for example, we woke up tomorrow and China was democratic and had Western systems of governance and checks and balances, independent judiciary, rights of the individual, and so on. Would we suddenly be happy with that if China was then the powerful country in the world? Like if it continued on its economic and military trajectory and replaced the United States as the dominant power? Hard to say, because some of America's concept of itself is that its military power and its global presence is part of its exceptionalism. So even if the political system in China was radically different, it is highly probable that we would still be heading for trouble between the United States and China. Now, that concept is a more difficult thing for me to grapple with psychologically, because I have this. It's very easy, I think, for us to go, well, the Chinese Communist Party is an authoritarian dictatorship, and therefore we need to resist that because we don't subscribe to those values, and we definitely don't want to replicate it in anywhere else.
Where does this rightness come from? Like, what gives the right to these countries to be like, have these Western ideals to be the dominant ideology?
So, well, my most controversial creed in international relations, and it is something that is absolutely true, I think, is that power sets norms. Like whoever has the most power sets the rules. There's no such thing. And so there are three main schools of international relations theory. There's realism, which says that it's an anarchical, global order. There is no authority higher than the state, right? Like, so if you want to appeal to an authority, it's to your national government, right? And then what happens is that each country has a hierarchy of needs, just like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It has a hierarchy of needs at the top of which is survival, right? And so in order to survive, they look at things in terms of power and interest to forge alliances and maximize their influence, because in a prison system, if you are the most powerful, strongest force, the probability that you are going to survive is the greatest, right? So every country tries to maximize its influence according to this theory, in accordance with its perceived national interest. And of the theories, this is clearly, I think, the most obviously true, right? Then there's constructivism, which is about, the international relations is decided by largely social psychology and one's history. And I think that is an influence, but I don't think it's a proper theory for international relations. Sorry, guys. And the third one is ridiculous, which is liberalism. Liberalism is the idea that it's basically a system of governance that is created through a degree of social agreement. So things like the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, World Health Organization, that you get these states that come together and cooperate, and through that process, you have a system of international relations. But that is a consequence, in my view, and I think I can defend it forever, a consequence of a very unique moment in history, in which the United States wasn't just the number one power in the world, but was the only global superpower. So human rights become much more important to you if all other concerns are not have been dealt with, right? So during the Cold War, the United States was willing to prop up all kinds of terrible regimes so long as it wasn't communist, right? Because they were in an epic struggle with communism, right? Once communism was no longer a threat, things like values, human rights, was easy to kind of be like, okay, well, we're not going to deal with you anymore because you are trampling human rights and we don't agree with you on that. So the reason why we need to, what gives people the right to or the ability to influence others in terms of their systems and their belief structures is largely power. Right, that's the mechanism by which that happens. People who think I'm wrong, I say something that's a bit trite, but the day that Sweden, maybe not Sweden because it's lost its gloss with COVID, but let's say Norway, right? The day that Norway does a humanitarian intervention in Tibet, right? I will agree that power isn't the most important thing. Okay, when Norway can send its troops into Tibet and the Chinese are like, yeah, no worries, then power isn't the biggest thing. But until that happens, power is the thing that determines what happens in the world. Power is extraordinary. The ability to get people to do things that they wouldn't otherwise do. And then there is this thing called soft power that is just nonsense as well. Like, it doesn't exist. I'm sorry, Joseph Nye is ridiculous.
What's soft power?
God, I really wish that everyone would wonder what that was.
I've heard of it. I just
no. And don't get me wrong. I really think it should be eradicated as an international relations concept. Soft power, and I'll be as generous to it as I possibly can, guys, is the idea that there is a power of attraction, right? That by being an exemplar of various kinds of virtue and nobility, others will be attracted to your ways of doing things, particularly if it's successful. So, for example, if you are a successful modern democratic state with all these kind of virtues, then other countries are going to look to you as an example and be attracted to your ways of doing things in order to replicate that. Now,
why didn't North Korea do that?
Well, this is the thing. So most countries do gravitate around the most powerful countries, but it's the power that does that, not the attraction. So a good way to and the problem with soft power, it has a certain intuitive appeal. So there is such a thing as the power of attraction, for sure, right? In individual life, someone who is highly attractive, right, has power over the people around them, for sure, right?
All women. Sorry, keep going.
Well, but that's true. I mean, like women, a young attractive woman has the ability to get men to do things that they would never otherwise dream of doing. Okay, like it just they go crazy. Okay, and that we all know that to be factually true. Okay, and a lot of women themselves know that. So. So there is such a thing as a power of attraction, and people go, well, okay, then you just apply that to a national state, but it doesn't apply.
It's just because there's so more moving parts. Because obviously you have military, you have economic. I feel like those are the two things that are political, but they're also linked. Health.
Well, I mean, it is certainly multifaceted. The biggest difference is that...
Who determines that power?
Okay, so here's the distinction. The reason why an attractive woman has power over a man is because that woman has something that the man desires and something that she has the power to withhold, right? Whereas in international relations, that power does not exist. Okay, if someone wants to emulate you, that's entirely within their rights to do so. Right? Like, there's no one that says, "Well, no, you can't be like us." The only power that exists then is coercive power. You can't be like us, and we're not going to let you. It's that coercive bit that is the factor in international relations, which is why soft power does not exist. It's not power is only power if one person can get the other to do something they otherwise would not do, right? And if an attractive young woman says, well, I'm not going to date you without that diamond, right? then that is coercive, okay? Whereas states don't have that power. It's not that. So there's an intuition that gives it an appeal that people want to believe in soft power, but it actually has no material effect in the real world. Now, I've said something that a vast number of people, very professional people, will disagree with. So I encourage you to not take my final word, but go and do your own thinking on that and form your own judgment. Same with the audience, because soft power is a recognized concept in international relations, but it's a terribly misguided one. And I think anyone who relies on soft power in terms of their international relations strategy is making a grievous error that will not succeed.
Well, my understanding with the soft power, so what you said was that it follows the same line as law of attraction. If another country is prosperous and other countries look to that and try to model it, is that what they're...
Well, that's what they're kind of referring to. But that's just influence and persuasion, right? Like, what defines power is very straightforward. Getting someone to do something they wouldn't otherwise do.
Yeah.
Right? So, for example, and that doesn't mean threats. So, like if you go to work, the boss doesn't have to threaten to fire you to work, right? The fact that they can fire you is usually enough to get the person to work, okay? And so that it's like coercive power is what we're talking about, right? And the power of attraction is real in personal life because one has a power to withhold something that the other person desires, whereas in international relations, no one has that power. It's just influence, it's persuasion, it's all negotiated.
Yeah.
The only things that actually create coercive power in international relations, military power, you will do this or we'll blow you up, or economic power. You want to develop yourselves economically, well, you have to apply by our rules in order for us to trade.
Here's the tariff.
Exactly. And everything else is influence and persuasion and discussion, and really doesn't affect in any way the structure of the relations, and that's why I keep coming back to the Norway thing. I'm like, well, that's fine if everyone wants to be like Norway because they've got a strong sovereign wealth fund and they have very good balance sheet and a stable society. If they're so powerful because of their soft power, why can't they then have real world impact? And they don't. They just simply don't. The power should have a means of exchange. Okay, so it's like energy. Right, you can swap it from one form to another. So you can trade your economic power for military power, right?
Yeah.
You can't really trade your soft power for anything, right? You can't say, well, you have a lot of military power, but I have a lot of soft power. Ergo, I can challenge you. Well, no, you can't.
There's no exchange.
Yeah, I mean the one possible exception to this would be the Catholic Church, right? Because in their sole case, they also have a state, right? Which is the Vatican City. So they have an absolute monarch who is the total ruler of the entire religion, and they have a territory. Now, that territory, other than the Swiss Guard, do not have military forces, really, right? They can't command legions. As one dictator once joked, how many divisions has the Pope, right? When the Pope was criticizing him. So that's true. However, the Pope does have outsized influence over a lot of people who are situated within other states. And they also have a seat at the table in international forums as a state themselves. So in their specific example, the concept of soft power might actually be a thing, because they can exercise moral authority over the citizens of other countries in a way that is not accessible to basically any other state. Israel, to a lesser degree, because of the global sympathy of towards Israel as a Jewish state, but to a much lesser degree, because Benjamin Netanyahu, as the leader of Israel, can't talk and speak on behalf of all Jews in the way that the Roman Catholic Pope can speak on behalf of all Catholics.
Yeah. Okay. And change of pace. So you also talked about Lithuania in your love for Lithuania. I'm really not familiar. I guess when you live in Australia, you don't, like, our education system doesn't really touch on the European countries per se, and like their roles with Russia. Yeah. I guess, when you're discussing with Lithuania, I want to know, what's the role of the Nordic countries in relation to Russia?
Okay, well, first of all, I wouldn't call the Baltic states Nordic countries, although Estonia does have an ethnic connection to Sweden and Finland to a degree. They are their own thing. Okay. But nevertheless, it's true that for the average Australian, the connection to the Baltic states and Lithuania in particular is quite tenuous. We don't even have a permanent embassy at the Baltic states. It's something I would really like to see that the Australian government change, because it is such an important axiom of geopolitical tension in that part of the world in which we have interest. So we should open an embassy at least one of the Baltic states to represent the Baltic states. The fact that I think the nearest one is Poland or something is just, I don't think it's adequate. So there is that separation. But there is an Australian history with Lithuania as well that isn't well known. So, for example, when I talk about Egle, there are two famous statues of Egle in the world. One's in Lithuania, no surprise there. The other one is in Canberra, right? And it is a pagan Lithuanian statue in Glebe Park in Canberra, sitting there next to kind of Mahatma Gandhi and a couple of others. And people walk past it every day. And of the two, I like that one by far the most. Like, it's actually, and not even joking, it's actually a gorgeous statue. Whenever I'm in Canberra, I go see it. But you can walk past it without ever looking at it. You could do your daily commute to work, because it kind of like it's a tree, It kind of like she's turned into a tree, but if you look at it from the front, you see the face coming out, and you see like her, emerging in from a tree. And if you go around the back of that statue, it's a serpent, right? And she also has a serpent like going above her, and then there's pagan Lithuanian writing all around it. But it's kind of hard to see. You have to go up and physically touch it, basically, to see it.
So random, but it
really is, and it's a big statue too. But again, despite being a big statue, people just never look at it, right?
Except Crispin.
And one of the things I desperately wanted to find was the origin of the statue, because when on the plaque, it had been donated in the 1980s. Now, this was odd for me because Lithuania had been occupied by the Soviet Union at that time, and it didn't really make sense that a statue from Lithuania would come to Australia during the Cold War. However, there was a famous and I'm not sure if she's still alive. I should check that. There's a famous sculptor from Lithuania. I think she was born in the 1920s or something, so probably not still alive. She's very old now. And she came over here, and she was part of like the expat Lithuanian community, and she donated it as part of like the Lithuanian society to the Australian government, and was put up in Canberra when they were building the park, and it's been there to this day. There's an under-acknowledged contribution there. There is a Baltic kind of society, I think, that kind of represents the community. It's sort of a group. I'd really like them to maybe take up the cause of getting an Australian embassy there. They really should support that, because I think we'll benefit from it.
So I'm just not really clear. So what's our what's the interest for Australia to have countries like Lithuania and the other Baltic state countries?
Well, I mean, partly what I've already described in my Lithuania video, their contribution in terms of language and culture and history, and they also have some like other things as well, like basketball. The Lithuanians, despite being a country of 3 million people, have like the second best basketball team in the world. So there are those things, but of course it is a long way from Australia. It's not, and these aren't big countries, so I can understand, that our interest is presumably commensurate with that fact. But they're still important for Australia in a few ways, I guess. So one would be that they're all part of the EU, and there's a rotating EU presidency. So that's 3 countries of the EU who have their own interests and their own influence on the European Union. And of course, Australia's relationship and interest in the EU is enormous, right? So for that reason alone, we should probably have more bilateral ties. They're part of NATO, and Australia has representations at NATO, and so militarily they're obviously important, and they're also a major flashpoint because the geostrategic tension that involves Russia, Sweden, the Eastern EU is revolving around the Baltic states. So we probably do need to know a bit more about what's going on there. I mean, when I speak to my Lithuanian friends, I really want Lithuanians to develop a greater sense of their national identity. So they ran a program many years ago. I don't know what happened to it. Maybe my friends can tell me, but that it was like a patriotic program because, like I said before, they have a strong immigration. Like a lot of people leaving Lithuania, a lot of young people leaving Lithuania. They've got a population decline, and because of the opportunities that exist in Western Europe relative to their home country. Now, they were trying to create a kind of a program to encourage people to see the benefits of being in Lithuania, what it means to be Lithuanian, have a greater sense of pride in their patriotism drive to try and get people to repatriate or to not leave in the first place. And so they need to... So what I would encourage Lithuanians to do is so much of their history in recent memory has been in opposition to Russia and the Soviet Union. Understandably so. They've not had a good history with Russia. However, if you were to ask, say, an Irish person what it means to be Irish, the word England would never feature in their response, right? They would say, poetry, Guinness, harps, whatever. Like it would be a lot of great stuff that's quintessentially Irish, what it means to be Irish, how great it is to be Irish, even though so much of their history is tied into resisting England, okay? And so we need to, I would like Lithuania to sort of develop that same sense of itself, that there are so many things intrinsic to being Lithuanian is worth preserving and is special. To simply define yourself in opposition to Russia, which I often think they do, is perilous for them, and then a lot of young people don't sign up to that because they're not they don't have the experience of it. Ergo, they're not going to be tied to Lithuania to preserve that narrative. They're much more likely to stick with Lithuania if they think there's something special about being Lithuanian.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. Change of pace. What else did I? we talked about statues as well.
Yeah.
And that was an interesting episode I had to edit.
Yeah, well, you did a good editing job there, actually. All the backdrops. I thought it was great.
Yes, please give it a like. I made it. Crispin complained because his hair was all messed up. So I was like, okay, well, I'll try to cut some of it out, and then you won't notice.
Yeah, that wasn't her fault. I had stumbled in here in the evening and just hit record and started blathering away. Normally, I'd have a bit more preparation.
Yeah, but you made a very fair point. I don't know if I have anything to add to that episode, but what really stood out to me for that episode was that idea of, again, like objects and ideas are two separate things that you said. And yeah, that how we're trying to look at present day values and putting that on to things that happened in the past.
Yep.
And what value does that actually bring? Which was a fair point, because we can't do that. Like what value does that bring? You know, doesn't change the world as it is today. As I thought about it, I was like, yeah, like if I knock down a statue, what does the world change? Not really. People are still human. People still have their own values, their beliefs, ideologies.
Well, the world does change. It just changes for the worst, right? Like, because people don't. If you have no memory, then so much of our society is built up around myths. Okay, now one can revise those myths, but they should be on the basis of the myth itself. So for example, I am challenged by the ANZAC myth. Right, for those people that aren't familiar, Australia has this narrative that Australian identity, the values that we kind of pride ourselves on, egalitarianism, mateship, that sort of thing, originated in the trenches of Gallipoli. Right? Now, that is, in my view, complete crap, right? Total crap. Not even like a little bit right, okay? So
please challenge my SEO. Oh, was it SOS knowledge from high school?
Yeah, no, and that's the thing.
What it's taught.
That is the way it's taught, okay? But it's wrong. And the reason why, there's a number of reasons. First of all, even in the context of the war itself, Australians lost 60,000 soldiers in World War I. 10,000 of those were at Gallipoli. So 50,000 soldiers on the Western Front, never celebrated, never remembered. The reason why Gallipoli gets all the attention is because it was a failure. Western Front was a success. It was a failure, and it was a conceived British idea. So the narrative goes that Australian soldiers naively went off to fight for the British Empire and were wasted at the hands of self-indulgent tea-drinking British officers. That's the narrative. And in the context of rebelling against British authority and working hard together to survive, deprivation characteristics, they developed a culture of larrikinism that we now acknowledge as Australian pastime today. I mean, it makes sense until you think about it for 3 seconds. Okay, so first of all, 10,000 people, not very many people. Okay, so much more happened in that war itself. But the fact of the matter is, all of these things were already Australian culture. And what made it, and I'm going to spin you an alternative narrative, and you tell me whether this makes more sense, okay? Australia was founded as a penal colony, series of colonies, okay, where large numbers of people were sentenced to transportation as convicts to Australia. Yeah. And then there were British guards sent out to look after them, okay? Now, the narrative of this is also taught poorly in history. Normally what's taught is like, such and such was stolen apple and sentenced to 7 years transportation in Australia. The vast majority of convicts sentenced to Australia were Irish rebels, okay? They didn't want to send them back to Ireland where they could cause more trouble, but they weren't worthy of execution or anything like that. So what do you do with them? You send them very far away where they can't cause any problems, okay? So that's what happened. That's why it was attractive to the British government to send them to Australia. Irish Catholics sentenced to Australia, other side of the world. British Protestant guards come to Australia as well.
Protestant. What does that mean?
Protestant is a denomination of Christianity. And
okay.
And the largest one outside of the Catholic faith. But that's another. Oh my god. Okay, and
I'm not
the English assigned to the Church of England, which is a Protestant thing, and we can go into the history of that another time. This is something else about the Australian education system, not just the narrative of ANZAC. Clearly, anyway, we had these British Protestant guards and these Irish Catholic convicts, and they had to form a new society. Right, they were in a new country on the other side of the world, historical enemies. Mm-hmm. And you had one with tremendous power over the other. But then those convicts would finish their sentence and they would be normal citizens. And they would have to interact with other convicts and British officers. So in order to create a new society, you had a culture of convicts who were very anti-authoritarian anyway. And they would create their own little cabal within their masses. The Catholic masses was one place that the British Guards couldn't go because obviously it was a Catholic observance, and you would have all these Irish rebellions, right? You had all the Rum rebellions, and you had the Bush Rangers and Ned Kelly and all that. All these Irish Catholics, okay, anti-authoritarian, larrikin, sense of egalitarian. We're all equal because we were convicts and things, and we're on the other side of the world. We're all in this together, and so a sense of not taking things seriously. A sense of everyone being equal, a sense of mateship, getting on in a very difficult environment, overcoming, the traditional religious issues. The AFL, Australian Football League, is born out of that. The rivalry between Carlton and Collingwood is the same thing. It's all Irish Protestant history bound up in Australian narrative. And that is how the Australian culture as it is today, in all its linguistic idioms, emerged. And this was well established prior to World War I, which added to it in no real meaningful way, except to delude us as to its origins. I'm all for revising history in the context of evidence and in the context of what they're celebrating that history for. So in my video, I was talking about, okay, well, no one was celebrating the fact that Thomas Jefferson and George Washington owned slaves. They're celebrated for completely other reasons. Now, unless you revise those reasons, unless you say, maybe the people who were doing the tea rebellion maybe should have just paid a bit more for their tea, and that they shouldn't have had an American Revolution, and then maybe the British were right. Like that's another narrative you could come up with, and then you might want to pull down those statues and say, that they were not worthy of being remembered because you think that the American Revolution was bad, right? That would be at least a logical progression, right? But to apply a completely different set of values retrospectively through time to attack a symbol of something that was completely unrelated to that value you're trying to enforce is iconoclasm. It's destruction. It doesn't improve anything. All it does is unwind the foundations of bond that brings you with your other fellow citizens and creates a conflict and war. It doesn't do anything positive. But there's, even in the context of the American Revolution, there's a point to this. So Benedict Arnold was an American who betrayed the cause for independence and sided with the British. Right. To this day, there's a statue of Benedict Arnold in London. I think it's London, as a great patriot of the British Empire who was willing to, turn against his fellow continental traitors to be loyal and patriotic to the British Empire and the Crown. Right, like that is celebrated. But in the context of an American narrative, he's the worst kind of traitor who was willing to destroy and trample the independence of the United States of America. At least when you pull down a statue in the United States of Benedict Arnold, it's in the context of what you actually don't want. I mean, not that there was ever a statue of Benedict Arnold, but you know what I mean. You have to. It has to at least tie to the reason why that statue is there. And
you're saying like not to take things out of context of why they were actually celebrated.
Yeah. So it's one thing if you go, well, that history wasn't correct. Ergo, it's like modern day cancel culture, right? All these people that hate on J.K. Rowling because she said something about trans people, thinks that biological sex is a real thing. They'll all of a sudden color their perspective of her work and her books and try and say that they're terrible texts and stuff, even if they had enjoyed them for many years before. It has nothing to do with like, and putting aside whether or not the trans thing has any weight, it has no bearing on her literary achievement. It's another thing to say you don't like the Harry Potter books because you don't like the books. Like, for example, I really like the first 4 books, and then I think it goes a bit cheesy. I think the Tom Riddle story after that, the whole Nazi plot of the mudbloods and so on, it becomes a bit the Voldemort's motivations seem a bit trite, a bit lazy. And I think he could have been a much more interesting villain, and he was being set up that way. And if I was to theorize as to why it went bad, it's because by the 4th book, the
traction.
It got a lot of traction. The first movie was starting to come out, and then she suddenly had so many more voices telling her the way the book should go that she wasn't left to her own literary skills, I guess. And you see that with other series like that as well, even the Lord of the Rings series. I mean, not the Lord of the Rings. The Game of Thrones series. So, it's just a really bad idea to go into a mob and tear down a statue. It doesn't represent anything good and doesn't achieve anything good.
Yeah. I think I just was coming from the standpoint of like if I were like hold these beliefs and wanted to pull down some sort of statue that I felt went against my beliefs, the problem is still there. Like whether or not a statue is there or not, like for me, I'm just like, it's just, it's what I view it as, but I feel like, the issues that I'm dealing with inside myself is still there. It's not like it's fixing anything. So therefore there is no value created when you're trying to cause all this chaos in the world, to prove a point. Instead, we should be having these kind of dialogue, these kind of conversations of, what I believe that history has taught me and like what it represents and what do you think? And it's challenged me in this way, and it's like, well, actually maybe it's this way, and it's like maybe you should do this, and like therefore there's a roadmap to actually improving things rather than trying to look again retrospectively and trying to fix the past. Like what's the point? Like we don't live in the past. It's happened. Hello. Very interesting point. Change of pace. Another change of pace is Victoria has like 3,000 plus coronavirus cases.
Yes, and I can talk about it. I haven't done a video on that, so she's breaking the rules.
I am breaking the rules.
But we can talk about Victoria.
It blows my mind just because in parts of Australia, a lot of people have gone back to normality and actually go back to work, and school and whatnot, and people are really excited to go out drinking. But now Victoria has blown up, and now I feel like there's a level of fear across the country. It's like coronavirus is still a threat. And now I'm imagining once our like internal borders opens, we're going to have cases across the country. And how are we going to deal with that, especially in a time where we don't have a reliable treatment, by my knowledge, or a vaccine?
Yeah. I think you've just summed it all up. I mean, in Australia, so first of all, for those that may not know, Australia is divided into various different states, and there's a lot of geographical space between them. So Victoria has a large number of new cases, and until that happened, it looked like Australia was on track to eliminate the disease entirely, right, just through suppression. And so people were almost ready to declare victory and get back to their normal lives within the sense of not being able to travel and do other things and have serious disruptions in that regard. But basically, the change to everyday life, which was so profound with the COVID lockdowns and things like that, was ending. It's very difficult psychologically for people to go back to these lockdowns. But I think that there are other threats as a consequence of this that we need to take account of. So the number one for me is the economic change. There's a lot of discussion about the so-called V-shaped recovery. Massive crisis over, quick recovery. Everyone is confident that the problem is behind us, ergo we don't need to think about it anymore, ergo we can get back to life as normal. And I think we were almost on that path. The problem with this massive blow up in Victoria, where we've got so many new cases, much more than ever before, is that it destroys confidence. It says, oh, okay, well, we can never be complacent. We can never think that we're behind it. It could blow up at any moment, which means it's very hard for people to decide to invest. People are going to say, oh, I'm going to take my life savings and put it in this business. Well, okay, well, there's no COVID here, but it could shut down tomorrow. Like, we have no certainty. So why would I risk so much with such a high degree of probability that things could go so wrong? So across the economy, that is going to impact our coming out of the recession and make the recession much more deep in its own context. So economically, it's very tragic. Emotionally, it's very hard to get people to go back to something when they're no longer, when they've done it once already. Like, it's if you know the pain is coming, and you know how long it's going to, like, what it means, very hard to endure, and a lot of people resist it. So I don't know if a lockdown will be effective because people will resist doing it. They'll make excuses. They'll find ways.
Do you think so? Because it's happened again? Because I feel like Australians are quite good at following the government's, like, recommendations. Or I don't know, in some parts.
So the reason we did so well is because we all pulled together and thought of other people. And when I say this, I don't think it's because Australians say, oh, screw you, we don't want to. No, it's not that. It's just how difficult it is, right? Like, you know, when people were willing to everyone was willing to kind of meet up on like a e-chat or something like that and do have a video conference with their friends and make that a kind of a ritual and try and make the best of it and all kind of be in it together. That's going to be hard. You'll have some people who just psychologically can't deal with it, right? Like, you know, we had a massive rise in suicides and things like that across the world with the lockdowns of young people. So, like, it's just harder second time around. It's also harder when not everyone's doing it, right? So, like, Victoria, people in Melbourne are in that situation, but people around the rest of the country aren't. Right? They're more afraid of the people from Melbourne rather than being in it together. So that undermines that bond of connection. It makes it more difficult. And the other thing is it throws up a huge question for us. So, and you alluded to this in your comments. Let's say there's no vaccine, right? Because that seemed to be where we were going. Suppress the disease completely, eradicate it from Australia, don't let anyone come in, and then when we have a vaccine, everyone will get it, and then we can open our borders and get back to normal life, right? And I think we could get on the hype for that for maybe 2 years. So you go, well, yes, there's all these promising clinical trials and it'll be just around the corner and blah, blah, blah. And we can probably keep that up for 2 years of just like hype, right? But then if there was no reliable vaccine, knowing that we don't have any for any other coronavirus, knowing that any vaccine might just be brief and temporary, who knows how long the antibodies and stuff remain in the system, we don't know. And let's say we get to 2.5 years, pushing 3 years with no vaccine. At some point, the government would have to say, this is a failure and we're going to have to bring in the virus. Well, the political consequences of saying, yeah, well, we tried, now grandma has to die, is like, is just impossible, right? And so what the Victorian outbreak has done has said, well, it's going to be very hard to get that back to zero, right? Like, it's likely we're going to have a continued transmission. And that decision that would have been 2.5, 3 years away pending no vaccine is going to be brought forward somewhat. It's to like, okay, well, are we going to change our approach to allow the disease to spread? Because the alternative is to lock down the economy forever. Because like it's one, because if the disease is gone, you can open the economy when there's no disease, and then you just kind of wait for a vaccine. Okay. And then after a certain point, you have to be realistic as to whether or not that vaccine is forthcoming and make a decision then. Now that same decision has to be made. You're like, okay, well, it's unlikely we'll be able to fully suppress the disease. Therefore, how long do we keep our economy absolutely closed in order to suppress it if the end game is not to eliminate it? And then how do we gradually reopen? Because the alternative is bankruptcy of the country. So, so this Melbourne Victorian outbreak is much more destructive than even we realise yet, because personally it's destructive, psychologically it's destructive, economically it's destructive, and sociologically between our relationship with Victoria and so on, that's also deleterious. And so, yeah, it's a bad thing, much more than the raw numbers. The numbers are still, in the hundreds. It's not like per day. It's not tens of thousands, but it is enough for us to be like, well, you wouldn't be just being yourself in Melbourne, would you?
Well, on the positive side is that this coronavirus still seems like there's a low death rate, or low mortality rate. So even if if we had to open up borders, most of us would be okay. It's just those populations who are vulnerable would have to put in measures.
Yeah, and this is the.
It could be like a flu shot.
That's it. What you've just said is the first step in changing the narrative, right? Like you haven't done it consciously, but that's what the government would say. It's like, well, if we're going to have to live with it, we're going to have to start messaging we're living in it, but the problem is it's a big reversal, right? We previously said, okay, well, coronavirus is devastating for whole swaths of the population. It's much more deadly than the flu, for example. Ergo, you'll have to make massive sacrifices for the benefit of your most vulnerable people. And now, if we open up, we're going to have to flick that message pretty hard and say, well, actually, it's not so bad. You can live with it.
But we're still learning about the virus. Like, I think there was just a huge influx of, when the World Health Organization came out, it's like, it's an epidemic. It's a pandemic. People were frantic to be like, what is that? What does that mean? And therefore, then, investments and economy and everyone was up in the air. I don't know. Maybe that's my perspective.
well, the complexity is how much is human life worth economically. So, and knowing also that the cost of economic restriction also costs lives, right? I don't think we would ever do this again as a global community, that the next pandemic that comes along is not going to result in the shutdowns like we are seeing today, unless it's like the Black Death or something, right? Unless it is truly hitting everybody. Like if it impacted children the way it impacts older people, then yes, we would have dramatic changes to our social life. But we shouldn't diminish also the reality of the decision, because coronavirus is much more deadly than the flu, right? And then, at least tenfold. Now, it's not damaging to young people by and large, right? You're very unlucky if you were to succumb to coronavirus as someone under the age of say 50. But we need to be honest with ourselves around that. Like it is we are making a decision to sacrifice some people. Now, I think that, and I want to be cautious about this because I do work in government and I do need to think about, in the future, the government decisions that could be made, which I could theoretically be part of. Therefore, I don't want to prejudice any of that, but just to state as a matter of fact that the Victorian outbreak does hurt us and does make some difficult choices. Now, at the moment, I don't think we're there yet, right? Like that, we've only just gone into lockdown in Melbourne.
We need 2 weeks or more.
Yeah, we need some time, and then we can decide whether or not other steps need to be taken. It might be that this lockdown is effective and the cases go down and everyone breathes a sigh of relief, and things take longer in Melbourne than the rest of the country, but the rest of the country continues to go down. In which case that would be great. But it does. The enduring fact is that we can't be complacent. We will get that sense of nervousness, and that's where I think the economy will suffer, because we won't have that sense of it's all behind us. Let's get back into work. No, it'll be. Let's always remember that anything could change.
At the same time, I think I just see like the value of every situation that happens, and I think definitely it's definitely reminded me that life is very short and we should value our health and every day, because we don't know when things will suddenly shut down. I think we've almost hit our time.
Well, I suggested an hour based on just the theory, but that doesn't mean we have to shut off at an hour.
Yeah.
But if you want to.
I guess in
it
general.
Seems like a very, very downbeat thing.
Yeah, I know. And I want to continue to have an upbeat thing, right? I want to finish on a high. All right, this is completely unrelated to what we've done so far, but I want to know, and I want our viewers to know.
We did actually agree to a format, and she's the one that's always saying, all right, now you have to do this introduction, and then you have to do it this way, and we're going to plan out our topics, and blah, blah, blah. And now she gets straight on the camera, and rules do not apply. Okay.
Yeah, well, this is what you basically do too. You're talk. And then Charlotte has to go back. How we start this? We got shut off. So,
Okay, so yeah, we were talking about you breaching the format.
Oh yeah, I was breaching the format. But you always do it. You always just go, okay, turn on the camera. I'm I want to talk about Lithuania. Oh, turn on the camera. Russia.
Both of those are countries. You can see the link between those two features. I'm very consistent in my.
Yeah. No, for sure. But I would like to, I guess, steer the conversation into more general about this channel, so dangerous policy.
Yep.
So you brought me on saying that you really wanted an outlet to share, information about world policy.
Mm-hmm.
What is this channel about, from your perspective? And why? Why should people care? Essentially, about listening to you.
Charlotte is struggling too. That's that.
No. Oh goodness.
So there's a few reasons why I want to start this channel, why I want this channel to grow. Number one, there is an education element to this. We try and release a video every week or so on government work, i.e. if you want to work in government, the sorts of things to expect as a public official.
This is Australian government.
Australian government, but yeah, I think it's broadly transferable. There are nuances, of course, in Canada and the US and New Zealand and whatnot, but broadly speaking, in the Western world, being a public official comes with a certain degree of shared understanding of what happens and who you are. And so there is having a topic of how to apply for the public service, what it means to operate in bureaucracy, how the different departments work, how policy is formed. All of those things do not have enough in the marketplace, I guess, of online content to explain how government works, right? So that's part of this channel. the broader part of this channel where I'm talking about various topics affecting the world is about educating people and having a discussion and dialogue about the impact of things in our modern life. And so there are a lot of things impact our modern life, which gives it a sense that the topics are varied. But by and large, there's a constant theme. There's the theme of global international relations and the changing world order, the rise of China, the reaction to that. There is the theme of the trends in modern life that are affecting individual choices that shape our economy and our life outcomes that have major policy implications. So the actual theme of these videos is very much aligned with the title of the institute, the dangerous policy. I mean, it's we want to be, and most of all, and this is where I think it adds value beyond the education thing, which I think is its own value, is that I try very hard to talk about controversial topics that a lot of people have views on that are difficult to talk about in government, right? Like, or where, for example, the impact of IQ on life outcomes. It's a very fraught topic because it's has political element, and I try and take the politics out of it and talk about its impact and how we deal with it and how as a society we grapple with these facts, and without being, trying to push an ideological viewpoint. But there is a balance because I recognize that in order for people to watch, they have to be entertained, and one of the entertaining things is to see people go on big rants about things, and occasionally, I definitely do that as well. And also I think the format is continuing to improve all the time. I mean, one of the things that this process has taught me is how essential it is to start before you're ready, right? So we have a lot of great equipment here. Charlene provides a lot of great support, and I use support in inverted commas. Support for the channel, not so much personal support.
It's because I keep making fun of your hair.
No, Crispin, you're so boring.
No.
You go on massive tangents. No, she doesn't sound boring, but she does needle me all of the time, not just some of the time, all of the time. But it's all right.
It's part of the job. Get over it. No, keep going. I'm so sorry.
Anyway, so but it is way more work having this channel than I ever imagined it would be, and I may not have started it had I known how much work it was, but I'm really glad that I have, and I'm sticking with it. So it's getting better all the time. The format will improve as we go, and we'll start having certain rules for the episodes. There's certain rules for submissions. Like there's sort of a blog that we need to revive for the Institute itself. So the Institute is more than just this podcast, and that has a series of submission guidelines. So, for example, people who write for Dangerous Policy will largely be writing in the format of like strategic papers. So problem, options, evaluation, suggested way forward. And the reason for that is to help train people in policy, how to develop and implement policy, how to shape government thinking on issues. So those things are important. But also I want to talk about issues that are of interest to people, like dating and marriage and life choices and mistakes that people have and regrets and literature. Like it doesn't need to be restricted to just one topic. So
battery.
Is the battery dead?
The battery's blinking.
It's blinking. Yeah, but blinking means it's alive.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah,
I think Charlie learned anyway.
But no. Look, I take the point. We do need to, because I also have great guests. We had Tabby, we'll have others, and yeah, well, hopefully, I mean, the goal of the podcast is to entertain and inform. People getting value out of it. Yes, I see that. Get value out of it. So look, if you are getting value out of this discussion. and you've lasted this long, that's fantastic. Thank you. Do hit the like button and consider subscribing. It really helps the channel. It helps promote it through YouTube. And I think now that we're getting noises in the background, a good time to leave it there.
Yeah. See you next week or next episode. I don't know. It'll be Crispin only, but I'll come back. And
she's always here. She's always here. And if you leave a comment, she will read it for sure.
Oh, 100%. I'm stalking the page. Okay, I don't know. I'm on a rant. Okay.
See you next time.
Bye. Peace.